There's a moment right before someone tells you the truth. You've seen it before. Their face shifts first. That flicker. That half-second where the mouth hesitates and the eyes quietly decide whether you're safe enough to hold what's about to come out. This is that moment. It is so brief that most people never notice it, yet it often contains more truth than everything that follows. Before a single word is spoken, before the carefully chosen explanation, before the defenses have time to organize themselves, there is a tiny pause where the nervous system makes a decision. Am I safe here? Will this person understand me? Or will what I reveal become another reason to protect myself? In that fraction of a second, years of experience silently come rushing to the surface. Every time someone was dismissed after opening up, every conversation where vulnerability was met with criticism, every betrayal disguised as intimacy, every moment when honesty became something that was later used as a weapon. The mind may not consciously remember every event, but the body does. The body keeps its own record of what happened, and it responds long before logic has a chance to catch up. That is why genuine vulnerability is rarely impulsive. It is negotiated internally first. There is an invisible conversation happening beneath the words, a rapid assessment that asks questions most people never hear. If I tell the truth, will I still be accepted? If I show this part of myself, will it be respected or rejected? If I stop pretending to be strong for just a moment, will someone stay or will they leave? Sometimes the answer arrives almost instantly. The shoulders relax just a little. The breathing slows, the voice softens. A person begins sharing something they have carried in silence for a very long time. Other times, the answer is no. The smile returns. The subject changes. A joke replaces the truth. The opportunity passes, and what almost emerged retreats once again into the place where so many unspoken feelings live. People often assume trust is built through dramatic moments, but more often it is built inside these quiet decisions. Every time someone risks showing a genuine piece of themselves and discovers they do not have to regret it, the nervous system learns something new. It updates an old expectation. It begins to understand that not every conversation ends in rejection, not every disagreement leads to abandonment, and not every vulnerable moment becomes a source of shame. This is why emotional safety cannot be created through words alone. You can tell someone they are safe 100 times, but if your reactions communicate impatience, judgment, ridicule, or emotional unpredictability, their nervous system will believe your behavior over your promises. Human beings are remarkably sensitive to consistency. We notice tone before content, expressions before explanations, and emotional presence before carefully constructed sentences. That fleeting hesitation is not weakness. It is intelligence shaped by experience. It is the mind trying to protect the heart, while still hoping that this time might be different. It reflects the delicate balance between the desire to connect and the instinct to survive. Every person carries that balance in some form, though it becomes especially visible in those who have been deeply disappointed, repeatedly misunderstood, or emotionally wounded in the past. If someone chooses to continue speaking after that pause, they are often offering something much more valuable than information. They are offering trust. They are placing a part of themselves into your hands without knowing exactly how you will respond. That is why the smallest reactions can have enormous consequences. A dismissive laugh, an interrupted sentence, an eye roll, or a careless comment may seem insignificant in the moment, yet they can quietly reinforce years of emotional caution. The opposite is equally true, a patient silence. Genuine curiosity, calm attention, a response that seeks understanding instead of judgment. These moments rarely feel dramatic, but they can become deeply transformative. They teach the nervous system that vulnerability does not always end in pain. They allow trust to grow slowly, one conversation at a time, until openness begins to feel less like a risk and more like a natural expression of connection. That is what makes this moment so important. It is not merely the pause before someone speaks. It is the crossroads between fear and honesty, between self-protection and genuine connection. It is the instant when someone silently decides whether their truth has a place in front of you. And when you recognize that moment for what it is, you begin to understand something profound. The greatest gift you can offer another person is not the perfect advice or the perfect words. Sometimes it is simply becoming the kind of presence that allows that tiny flicker of hesitation to dissolve into enough trust for the truth to finally be spoken. Someone is standing in front of you right now, whether in your actual life, in your memory, or somewhere in the quiet architecture of every relationship you've ever built, and they're about to tell you the real reason they chose you. Not the version they've given you before, not the polished, socially acceptable line they'd say at a dinner party if someone asked how you two got together. The real one, the one buried underneath performance, underneath politeness, underneath the version of themselves they've been trained since childhood to present to the world. Here's the truth, though. Most people never actually hear this confession, even when it's spoken directly to them. Not because it wasn't said, but because they weren't listening for it correctly. They're listening for compliments. They're listening for comfort. And the real reason someone chooses you was never meant to comfort you. It was meant to expose you. Sit with that for a second. Because what if the reason someone loves you isn't romantic at all? What if it's something closer to psychological? What if you weren't chosen for your looks, or your sense of humor, or the way you make someone laugh at 2 a.m, but because some unconscious part of them recognized something in you that mirrored an unfinished wound they've been carrying their whole life? There's a concept in psychology for this. The idea that we're often drawn to people not because of a conscious checklist, but because something in them echoes an old, unresolved pattern from our own history. You don't need the technical vocabulary to feel it, though. You've felt it your entire life. That pull toward certain people that made absolutely no logical sense. That strange comfort you found in chaos, mistaking it for chemistry. That feeling of being chosen that arrived wrapped in a low, persistent anxiety you could never quite name. And this is where it gets genuinely dangerous, because the person who's about to confess why they chose you isn't just revealing their feelings, they're revealing their unconscious. And once that door opens, there's no closing it again. Let's go there together. When someone says, "I chose you because you understood me," here's what's actually being said underneath the words, underneath the safety of ordinary language. You felt familiar to a part of me I've spent my entire life trying to hide. Most people don't see this clearly. They assume love is chosen consciously, that attraction is logical, deliberate, built out of shared values and mutual respect. But the mind doesn't actually work that way. It works in patterns laid down long before you could even speak, before you had opinions, you had wiring. And that wiring, formed during the earliest, most defenseless years of your life, quietly decides, without asking your permission, who will feel like home to you and who will feel like a stranger. So when someone stands in front of you and says, "I chose you," what they're really confessing is a kind of psychological inheritance. They're telling you That something in your voice, your silences, your particular way of receiving pain matched a frequency they recognized long before they ever met you, long before either of you were adults, long before either of you had any language for what was happening inside you. And that's the moment the mind gives itself away, because the second they try to explain why you feel like home, they run straight into something they were never supposed to look at directly: the original wound. The first person who taught them what love actually costs. The first face that shaped their nervous system's entire definition of safety or danger or worth. What they'll rarely admit out loud is that loving you sometimes feels like healing, and other times feels like drowning in the exact same water they nearly drowned in as a child. This isn't cynicism. It's one of the oldest, most uncomfortable truths in psychology. We don't fall in love with people so much as we fall in love with unfinished business. We're drawn again and again toward the emotional shape of our earliest relationships, not because we're broken, but because the mind is obsessed with resolution. It wants to go back and fix what it couldn't fix the first time around. And it will use you, your face, your voice, your particular way of disappearing when things get hard, or staying when everything else falls apart, as the stage on which it tries, one more time, to finish the story. So when they say, "I chose you," they're also quietly saying, "I'm trying to rewrite my childhood through you, and I don't even fully realize I'm doing it." Let that land for a second, because now you understand something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The reason you were chosen was never purely about who you are on the surface. It was about who you are underneath, the part of you that responds to abandonment in a specific way, the part of you that either soothes or triggers old fear, the part of you that either confirms someone's deepest belief that love is safe, or confirms their deepest belief that love always eventually leaves. This is the confession no one really prepares you for, because when someone finally tells you why they chose you, and you feel that sudden surge of emotion rising in your chest, that overwhelming urge to cry, it's rarely just about them. It's about every unanswered version of that question you've carried since childhood. It's the relief of finally hearing someone say you, exactly as you are, without conditions attached, even if some small suspicious part of your mind refuses to fully believe it yet. Let's go a little deeper, because this is where it gets uncomfortable in a different way. Psychology has long described the defense mechanisms we build to protect the ego from unbearable truths: denial, projection, repression, all the quiet ways the mind protects itself. And one of the strangest tricks it plays is this: the moment real, unconditional love actually arrives, the psyche often doesn't celebrate. It panics. Why? Because unconditional love threatens the entire architecture the ego built just to survive. People raised to believe love must be earned often mistake healthy, unconditional love for danger, because their nervous system is wired for familiarity, not peace. They may create conflict or withdraw, not from lack of love, but because closeness feels unsafe. Deep down, many carry the lifelong question, am I worth choosing? When someone genuinely chooses them without conditions, it can bring both grief for past emotional wounds and profound relief at finally feeling accepted for who they truly are. This is the emotional peak most people never actually reach, because they're too busy performing composure to let themselves feel any of it. But here's the truth. Composure is often just repression wearing a socially acceptable mask. The illusion collapses right here. The illusion that you have to be impressive to be loved. The illusion that vulnerability is weakness. The illusion that if people saw the real you, the anxious, uncertain, occasionally desperate, occasionally selfish, deeply human you, they would leave. That illusion was built a long time ago to protect a child who didn't yet know that imperfection and worthiness were never mutually exclusive. And when someone chooses you anyway, not despite your contradictions, but sometimes because of them, because your contradictions are what make you feel real instead of curated, a part of your psyche that's been on high alert since childhood finally gets permission to stand down. This is the internal shift that years of therapy often try to help people reach, not romantic love itself, but the terrifying, liberating realization underneath it. You do not have to earn your right to exist in someone's life. Most people never see this clearly because we're culturally trained to interpret being chosen as flattery, as luck, as coincidence. But there's a far more unsettling and far more beautiful way to think about it. Very little of this is actually coincidence. Every person who enters your life at a meaningful emotional depth is, in some way, an encounter with your own unconscious. They function as a mirror. Sometimes they reflect your unresolved pain. Sometimes they reflect potential in you that you've never claimed. And sometimes, rarely, precious and almost accidentally, they reflect both at once, forcing you to finally look at parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime avoiding. So when they confess why they chose you, listen for what they're not saying too. Listen for the fear underneath the affection, the fear that if they love you too much, they'll lose themselves the way they lost themselves before. Listen for the hope disguised as certainty, the hope that this time, unlike every time before, staying won't hurt. Listen for the exhaustion behind the tenderness, the exhaustion of someone who has spent years protecting themselves, finally choosing to lower the walls for someone they believe might actually be worth the risk. Because that's what being chosen really is, not a compliment, a risk. A vulnerable, genuinely terrifying act of psychological exposure disguised as romance. And this is where the internal conflict deepens even further, because now you have to ask yourself the question this entire confession was always building toward: are you willing to be truly seen? Not the curated version, not the highlight reel, not the person you perform at work, at family dinners, on social media, in every interaction where you're quietly calculating how much of yourself is actually safe to reveal. Because being chosen only matters if you're willing to actually show up as the person being chosen. This is the uncomfortable truth buried inside every tearful confession, every "I chose you" whispered in a rare moment of unguarded honesty. It's not just an offering, it's an invitation, and invitations require a response. You can retreat back into old patterns. You can deflect with humor. You can minimize with logic. You can protect yourself preemptively by assuming it won't last, because assuming it won't last somehow feels safer than hoping it will and being proven wrong. Or you can do the harder thing. You can let yourself actually be affected. You can let the words land instead of deflecting them. You can let your body finally do what it's probably been trying to do this entire time. Release the tension, drop the shoulders, let the eyes finally do what they've been fighting so hard not to do. Because here's the final layer. Buried beneath every defense mechanism, every childhood adaptation, every carefully constructed wall. You have been waiting your entire life to hear someone say, "I chose you," and actually mean it, without conditions attached. And that's the moment the mind gives itself away in the most beautiful way possible, because for one unguarded moment, the performance stops, the armor lowers, the endless internal negotiation about whether you're enough goes quiet, even if only briefly. This isn't weakness. Some would call this individuation, the lifelong process of becoming your full, integrated self, shadow and all. Others would call it catharsis, the release of emotion that's been repressed, sometimes for decades, finally finding an exit. Whatever language you use for it, the experience is the same. Something old finishes. Something new becomes possible. But let's not stop there, because there's a layer underneath even this one, and most people close their eyes before they ever reach it. Ask yourself something you've probably never asked out loud before. What would it mean if the person who chose you also, somewhere in their unconscious, fears you? Not the way you fear a threat. The way you fear a mirror that shows too much. Because to be truly known by someone is to lose the ability to hide from them. And hiding, for most people, has been a survival skill since childhood. What they'll rarely admit is that the same intimacy that heals them also strips them bare. And being stripped bare, even lovingly, even safely, reactivates one of the oldest fears the human mind carries, the fear of being fully seen and still rejected anyway. This is why some confessions of love arrive shaking. This is why some people can say, "I love you," far more easily than they can say, "Please don't leave me." That second sentence requires admitting need, and admitting need, for a nervous system raised on self-sufficiency, can feel like removing your own skin in public. And this is where it gets genuinely dangerous, because now you have to hold two truths at once without letting either one collapse the other. They chose you genuinely, completely, and they are terrified of what that choice actually costs them. Both are real. Both are happening simultaneously, in the same heartbeat, behind the same eyes that are looking at you right now, waiting to see whether you'll run. Most people don't see this because our culture teaches us that love is supposed to feel easy, effortless, uncomplicated, that if it requires this much unpacking, this much psychological excavation, it must be somehow wrong. But the opposite is closer to the truth. Anything worth calling transformation is, by definition, uncomfortable, because it requires the death of an old self before a new one can take its place. Real love isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to stay present despite the fear, again and again, until the nervous system slowly, painstakingly learns a new lesson. This one might not leave. That relearning doesn't happen in a single confession. It happens in 1,000 small moments afterward. The mornings you stay instead of retreating, the arguments you repair instead of abandon, the silences you sit through instead of filling with anxious noise. The confession is only the doorway. What happens after it is the actual work. And the actual work is where most people quietly give up, because healing is slower and far less cinematic than the moment that inspired it in the first place. So here's a harder question than, why did they choose you? Here's the one that actually matters. Now that you know why, what will you do with that knowledge? Will you use it as ammunition, proof to pull out during the next argument, evidence you were right about how they feel, a weapon disguised as a memory? Or will you use it as an anchor, something to return to on the days the relationship feels uncertain? A reminder that beneath the noise of daily friction, there's a foundation that was built consciously, deliberately, and honestly. That's the moment the mind gives itself away one more time in the days and weeks after the confession, because the ego wants to metabolize vulnerability into control. It wants to take the raw, unguarded truth someone handed you and turn it into leverage, because leverage feels safer than trust. This is the final trap, the one that quietly destroys relationships that survived every earlier obstacle, not the absence of love, but the mishandling of it once it's finally been named out loud. What they'll rarely admit, and what you need to admit to yourself if you want any of this to actually mean something, is that being chosen is not a finish line. It's a beginning. It's an invitation to keep choosing each other deliberately, on the ordinary days when no one is confessing anything, when the extraordinary emotion of this particular moment has faded into the quiet, unremarkable texture of everyday life. Because anyone can be moved by a confession. Anyone can cry when a hard truth is finally spoken out loud. The harder, rarer, more meaningful act is choosing to stay tender the next day and the day after that, once the words have already been said and all that's left is the actual living. So when that confession comes, whether from someone standing right in front of you, or from the memory of someone who already said it once, or from some future version of yourself still waiting to hear it, don't rush past it. Don't intellectualize it into something safer than it is. Don't perform strength when what you actually need is to let yourself be moved. Because the truth, even after everything we've just unpacked, is brutally simple. You were never chosen because you were perfect. You were chosen because you were real. And the tears that rise when you finally understand that aren't a sign of fragility. They're proof that some part of you, long buried, long silent, long convinced it wasn't worth choosing, finally believes it might have been wrong about that. Let it be wrong. Let yourself be chosen. Let yourself be seen. Because the moment you stop performing worthiness and simply allow yourself to receive it, that's the moment the confession stops being about them and starts being about the truth you were always too afraid to admit to yourself. You were worth choosing all along. Say that back to yourself slowly, the way you'd want someone else to say it to you, not as an affirmation you're forcing yourself to believe, but as a fact you're finally allowing yourself to hear. Because the loudest confessions in life rarely come from someone else's mouth first. They come from the moment you stop waiting for permission to believe something you already knew, somewhere underneath all the noise, all the performing, all the years spent proving you deserved a place in someone's life. That's the part almost no one tells you about being chosen. It was never really about them at all. It was about whether you could finally choose yourself back.